So Emma and I decided to wear the same outfit tonight.
Yeah. I tried to change outfits with my sister when I saw this, but she was not convinced.
But this is good. This means we're compatible.
Yeah.
It's going to go well. Hi, I'm Claire Bidwell-Smith. I'm really excited to be moderating tonight and talking to Emma Cline about her amazing new novel, The Girls. So let's get started. The question that I think everybody has initially with this book is why the subject?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I think a lot of it came from just growing up in California, where it's such a big part of the lore and mythology. And both my parents are also from California, and both of them are here tonight, including many of my siblings and friends. But I think both of them sort of pointed to this Manson family as this big defining event of their adolescence. So I grew up hearing about it, and he was sort of the boogeyman, the version of the boogeyman that I had.
Do you remember the first time you heard about it? Like, what do you remember about it?
I mean, when I was very young, they told me that San Quentin prison was Charles Manson's house. So I thought that's where he lived in the way that little kids do. I was like, that's a big house. Scary and big. And then when I was older, I sort of figured out that he didn't live there. But you sort of encounter Helter Skelter, which is bizarrely on everyone's parents' bookshelves. I don't know how it gets there, who puts it there, but it's in every house. And yeah, so I read a lot about it as a teenager and continued to read about it. And for me, the story was always really focused on this one person, Charles Manson, who in the end seemed pretty boring to me, or familiar in a way. We sort of know the story of the sociopath, the charismatic sociopath.
So how did the book first start to take shape? What was that? How long ago? What was that moment?
Yeah, a lot of it just came out of this desire I had to write about communes and groups. So in the beginning, it was a novel about a commune, and it was sort of aimless novel. And then once I really started thinking about this character, who you'd encounter in message boards and sort of floating around the internet, these people who had been peripherally involved in something like Manson family or Jonestown even, which also started in the Bay Area. It's a good place for it, if anyone wants to join a cult. And you know, it's still a big part of their story that they had this involvement. And I really started thinking about a character who was older and who might have been peripherally involved, and what would it mean to them? What would be the story they told themselves?
So you started thinking about Evie as an older character initially?
Yeah, it was never...
I was going to ask you about why, you know, you show her young and old, and what that process was like coming to that.
For me, it was never just the younger character in 1969 when she's 14. For me, what was always the most interesting part, and the way that the narrative started to take shape, was really thinking about the tension between this older person and this younger person, like this moment of peak emotion, which is adolescence, which is just, adolescents live at such a high pitch, it's so extreme and hard to maintain. And in a way that felt like what we think of as the 60s, like this moment which was so extreme and hard to maintain. And in this part of California especially, I think we see how people have dealt with it this many decades later. Like, because you can't sustain that high emotion or high idealism. So I'm interested in sort of the conversation between that moment and then sort of what it became.
So you started with her and then moved into the younger version. Did you have a clear idea of the book and how it would play out and the characters and, I mean, how they would, I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny because once the book's done, you're like, oh, that's what it was. But of course you forget like the whole misery of writing it, which is like, you have no idea what's happening. But now, yeah, it seems fun. Seemed like I always knew. But yeah, no, of course it was like lots of back and forth, lots of drafts, which I foisted on my sister. I made my little sister read 8 drafts of it, 9 drafts.
So how long from start to finish did the book take?
I had been working on this commune novel beforehand, which I'd maybe worked on for a few years. And then I went to Columbia for the MFA program, and I started this novel there. So it took about 2 years in this incarnation.
Tell us a little bit about your background as a writer. You know, when did you first start writing? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I'm from a really big family. I have 6 brothers and sisters.
Where are you in the lineup?
I have an elder brother, and then I'm the oldest of 5 girls, and the youngest is a boy. And my mom had 7 kids in 10 years, which is so we're all very close in age. So I think I was a big reader when I was little, partly because you can do it alone. You don't have to share it. You know, it's like a private mental experience which no one has access to. So I think that was a big part of it. And then always sort of writing little stories and stuff. But yeah, I think I went to kind of a great little high school that taught contemporary short fiction as part of their English classes, which I think was sort of rare and lucky. So I got to read Lori Moore and Dennis Johnson at a young age.
Yeah,
I think
really
that's
cool.
nice to know that, you know, people are writing nowadays. It's not all like Edith Wharton, and, which I think is nice to teach young sort of high school kids that it's happening now.
Was there a moment for you when you decided that you really wanted to pursue writing really seriously?
I can't think of like a particular moment, but I think it just really comes out of a love of reading. What about for you?
Turn it around
I
on
just
me.
learned this new trick.
That's my favorite trick as a therapist. Sometimes I even ask my clients, like, what do you think I'm thinking?
Claire is a therapist, we should say, which is like also, yeah. When you see that a therapist is going to be your moderator, you get a little frightened.
Let's talk more about your mother.
Yeah.
Just kidding. It was similar for me. I'm an only child, and I was alone all the time, and books were my friends and my social life. My parents were much older, and they had this very adult life, and I just kind of disappeared into books, and it was my love of books that, you know, led me to writing as well.
It's a gateway
Yeah,
drug.
yeah, absolutely. So who were your favorite authors as an adolescent?
I loved Anne of Green Gables, Betsy Tacy books. I don't know if anyone's
God,
read
I loved
those.
those so
It's kind
much.
of, it's rare
This is
to
why we're wearing the
actually-
same outfit.
Yeah. They're these wonderful books, and I realized that was the first time I had read about a female writer. There's a character, Betsy, who, and how old are they when those books start? 7
They're young,
or something?
yeah.
But it goes up until she's probably 25 or 26.
And it's set, what, in like the 20s or something?
Yeah, in Minnesota. It's
Yeah.
like these wonderful series of books. But she's a writer, and she has a little trunk where she keeps her writing supplies in. And I think that's why I wanted to be a writer, because I thought you got accessories. You know how artists get like all their writers don't get anything fun. But this
Yeah.
made it seem like you got a whole trunk of exciting things.
Did you read Harriet the Spy?
I did read Harriet the Spy.
I loved Harriet. She went around just writing about everybody. She would just go around her neighborhood and record everything. I think that's how I ended up a memoirist. But, so let's hear about college and Middlebury and the New Yorker. And
Yeah. I went to college in Vermont, and
I did as well.
Oh,
I went to Marlboro.
oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm from California. You're from Georgia, right? So I didn't know about winter really. So I just had a denim jacket,
Denim.
which is very California.
Yeah.
Like this will be fun. This has carried me through till now. But yeah, I was actually an art major at Middlebury, not a writing major. And I thought art was kind of a helpful sort of sideways way to get into.
Were you aware of the writing? There's so much writing lore about Middlebury. And,
Yeah.
Was that?
It was
that
part of it,
influence
and
you
I
at all?
took some writing classes while I was there, and went to Breadloaf, which is their summer sort of English and creative writing program, / like summer camp for adults, which was great. But yeah, I think art it's a lot of the same ideas as writing. You're trying to communicate something, but you have to figure out how to literalize an emotion or a feeling. You know, how are you going to represent it in a way that's communicable and accessible. So that was kind of interesting. But I was a conceptual art major, so it's like a lot of sort of goofy stuff. I spent one semester at San Francisco Art Institute, which was it was all performance art. So somebody came in with a chainsaw and cut through the teacher's desk and then threw up through a Darth Vader mask. I feel like every novelist should go to art school. That's my feeling. Really, it's much more exciting.
I mean, I think in a lot of ways that's really helpful about, breaking rules. I think one of the things as a writer that I'm always having to remind myself is to break rules, because we're taught so many rules about writing and about books and about what we should write about and how the sentences should be. But often it's when we break rules and we write sentence fragments, or we write and, just decide to take a different route that things come through. So I think that, that probably was a really valuable experience in lots of ways. Are there other things that have helped you kind of break out of, how did you find your voice? Was there anything in particular that helped you do that?
I think it helped, although now I'm reading all of them, of course, as a sort of high school student, to not read the classics in a way, which is maybe, I don't know, of course, yeah, now I'm reading them, and I find them really interesting and valuable to read, especially as a writer. But I think it was reading a lot of weird things, a lot of Archie comics. I feel like that's like 80% of my writer's DNA comes from Archie comics, just reading them.
My daughter's name is Veronica.
Oh.
I've got a Veronica cover framed in her room.
Or just sort of reading things that you wouldn't think of as being part of the canon or anything. Like my sisters and I love reading trashy memoirs. That's our favorite genre of all time. And I feel like those kind of weirder inputs help in a way, because you aren't sort of thinking about the same things maybe, or there's alternate ways to approach something.
Yeah, I like that. What about story structure, and how do you make sense of that, and what did you have to figure out for yours? I think structure as a writer is one of the most challenging things to do. Yeah. Every project I'm working on, it's always the structure that I have to figure out, as I go. But sometimes I have to write my way into it to find it. I'm always curious about how other writers tackle structure.
I find like the first couple of drafts, I'm just sort of testing the floorboards a bit, where you're just writing into it and seeing what happens. And sometimes incident will sort of bubble up, like some idea of plot or something. And then later, sort of looking at everything you have and really trying to shape it. And for me, what's been really helpful is looking at other books and really thinking, like, what are the structures I most respond to as a reader? Sort of how do they balance it? Just thinking a lot about the experience that a reader has reading.
What were your favorite parts to write in this novel?
None of it. But if I have to make up something that was my favorite, well, I think...
Like, was it grueling the whole time, or were there parts that you really enjoyed
There was
writing?
one, like, blessed stretch, which was the final week of writing. And I feel like I'll never get it back again. That it was this one beautiful moment, and it's lost to me forever. But it was like this really pure moment of, like, creation, or it just... I could start to see it as a book, and it really felt to me like I was building some kind of world that had density and reality. And like maybe the 5 minutes after I finished and sort of wandered out into my yard.
Did you know you were definitely done?
Yeah.
Was there a moment?
And like the last line, somehow at the last line I was just like, oh, it's there. And then I was like, and sort of went out into my yard and laid on a bench and was just, this is okay. And those were 5 great moments. And then everything else, misery.
What was the publishing process like? Was it a good experience for you? Was it easy, hard?
Yeah, it's weird. They really trick you as a writer. They just, they make it seem like it's all just like writing by windows with like light streaming in. And then like you're shocked into this publishing world, which is so different. And like blessedly incomprehensible until you have to know about it. And I try to know as little as possible. I think it is very strange, like we were talking about earlier. You've done something in private for so long, and it's this really emotional sort of private experience, and then suddenly you have to sort of watch it be moved through the system in this weird way. and then also talk about it in this public way, which is
Right.
extremely different from writing it, and sort of not
I
what you
think this
think
right
about.
now is the opposite of sitting in a room by yourself writing a book.
Oh, I always wear these little microphones as I'm writing.
And these lights. I have lights just like this in my office.
I angle the light right on my face.
I usually invite a lot of people over to watch me.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I don't know if you can even really think about this part while you're writing.
No.
It's not helpful, or like, so that's why they keep it a secret from you.
Yeah. They don't tell you you're going to have to do these kinds of things. So are you enjoying this so far? Are you enjoying the book tour, the responses to the book?
I think what's been really nice is meeting people who have read the book. It's still so weird to me.
Yeah.
When people will say a character's name, I'm like, how do you know about that character? And I think that's the nicest part about it is thinking about it being meaningful to people in whatever way. But the sort of publicity stuff has been a little bit, it's just strange. It's so not why you write a book. And you sort of have to suffer through it. And soon it will be July. But I'm not suffering right now. Although, in all those videos, everyone had these giant whiskey bottles
I know,
and
what was-
like
where's
champagne bottles. I'm
Where
just
are
curious
cocktails?
why that was. This is just some flowers.
So one of my favorite aspects of your book was just the adolescence of it all. I felt like I was really dropped back into my own, girlhood at that cusp of understanding my sexuality and understanding my relationship with men and my thoughts about them and my body. And I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about what it was like to write from that place. And I mean, I feel like it must have been easy for you because it comes across, you're soaked in it in this book, and it's so lovely. And it was meaningful to me to go back to that period. Because it's short. Like, I think once we hit 16 or 18, then we're in a whole nother place. Then that strange interim of 14, 15.
Yeah, and I was very thinking a lot about what age is that exactly when I was thinking of the character. And I feel like 14, you are kind of on that precipice. Yeah, for me, I was thinking a lot. I have a lot of younger sisters, and we're all very close in age. So even through my adolescence, if something happened to me and I didn't quite, experience it fully, I'd see it repeated immediately 4 times. So it was like this real magnified sense of the entire girlhood endeavor. Just sort of so much energy. And especially in one household, it just befalls it. It's like an illness on the house. It's like they have to mark above the door, like 5 teenage girls live in this house, quarantine us. But so that was part of it. And then I kept a diary all through high school, which I reread in preparation before I wrote this book. And you always wish that you were a really thoughtful, introspective teenager who's just kind of living life and having these lovely thoughts. But I was a total monster. Just like it was a nightmare to encounter again, the horrifying teenage brain, which it's amazing to me that they let them drive cars.
I agree.
Because it's these real extremes. Everything is either the worst thing that's ever happened or the best thing. And it's emotionally exhausting to even think about being back there, which is why I wanted an older narrator who didn't have to be living at that heightened state all the time. And for me, adolescence
And yet you forced her to watch that.
Right.
With another character.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, I do think she's a bit... she's sort of still stuck in adolescence in a strange way. But yeah, I think adolescents already live at such a pitch where everything feels life or death. So pairing it with this extraordinary crime and then the ordinary crime of being a teenager, I liked those two things together.
The ordinary crime of being a teenager. I like that. I want to ask you about your sentences. I love your sentences. They've been talked about a lot. Just they're very lyrical, and there's everyone keeps talking about this rhythm that you have, and And I'm just wondering if that just comes naturally to you, if you felt like it was part of the book itself or the characters. Is that your writing style that would appear in future novels? Has it appeared in much of your other work? I'm just kind of curious about it.
I think as a writer, I've always been drawn to books that had like a very strong visual vocabulary, or sort of a syntax which belonged to this book and this book alone. So I really wanted to write something that felt that way, like it was almost teaching you how to read it in a certain way. But it wasn't so purposeful, certain things. It's almost like just the way that you hear something. Although, and that's always how I've written, is sort of hearing it in your head, which we were talking about earlier. It's very strange because there's an audiobook now, so someone else is reading it, and they hear completely different sentence structures than I hear as I was writing it. So I could only listen to 10 seconds of it because I was like, oh no, she's putting the emphasis on the wrong word. Like for me, it's on this word. So it's sort of a crossover between hearing and
Hang on,
reading.
I think they're going to bring us some wine.
Oh, thank you. Some ice cream too.
See, we're writers. We should be drinking up here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Although that's sort of gotten me in trouble, because that's how I read too. It's like so auditory, and I'm taking it in. And there was this one time in high school, I was reading a Cormac
Cheers.
McCarthy book. Cheers to Cormac. And there was, I was like so in it, and he's such like a thick writer. And there was this line, and I was like, oh, the Silent Hills. I was like, that's so beautiful. That word, like I've been searching for a word like that, silent, like it must mean like silty, the silty, beautiful hills, silent. And then, 5 years later, I was looking through the book and I had circled it just like, oh my God. And I was like, silent. Silent hills. That's all it was. So sometimes that happened while I was writing this book, which only came out when the copy editors were like, do you mean this word? And I was like, oh my God, because I had just learned a whole different thing. I think it comes from reading books before you can really understand what's being written. Sort of reading ahead of your age level. It almost messes up your comprehension, and then you can act like it was a purposeful stylistic choice when you're on stage at this moment. The Silent Hills.
Love that. I'll be curious to see how it evolves for you, though, in future books.
Yeah.
My first book, I had a lot of kind of lyrical prose as well, and then it shifted a lot from my second book because it was a different subject, and it was much more kind of atmospheric almost in my first book and helpful. So you could have a completely different character that might change your writing style, which I think is fascinating.
That's what's weird, too, about publishing a book is it's this time capsule of this very particular period when you were reading these kinds of things and interested in those things. And then, of course, your next one is like a totally different.
Yeah.
And
you could write this same novel again in a completely different style. So speaking of, what are you working on next? What's coming ahead?
I'm working on a novel, which is not set in the past. I've gotten some weird emails from people. This is what I learned when you write something set in any time that isn't now. People are like, on page 5, like, did you know that like Coca-Cola did not come out with bottles until this year, blah, blah, blah. Or they're like, oh, the dentist uses latex gloves. They weren't out till the following month in 1969. You're like, do you work for the latex glove store? Like, what? How do you know this about the gloves? So no more. No more.
So it's set now.
Yeah. I know latex gloves are around.
And how does it feel to be writing it when you have all this attention right now and all this expectation? And my second book was so much more terrifying to write than my first because no one knew who I was. Nobody cared. When I was writing the first book, I didn't know if it was going to be published. And then I had a book deal for the second one. I knew it was actually going to be on shelves and that people knew who I was and what was going to happen. And that was really scary for me.
Yeah.
How's it for you?
Well, you always feel fine about it until someone is like, "Are you scared?" And then you feel scared. But I mean, I started work on it. The book I finished it a year and a half ago now. So I've had that time, to start this new thing, and I feel like I've gotten enough under my belt of this new thing that I can see the momentum continuing, even through the horrifying like mind trip, which is publishing a book, which I'm grateful for. But I mean, talk to me in 2 months. You're a therapist, right?
I know.
Can I have your cell phone number?
On your flip phone? So let's get to that. The flip phone,
Yeah.
no social media. Tell us about that.
The flip phone, I feel like at this point it's
She has a
80
flip phone, like a
Yeah.
flip phone. She went in the Apple store today and they were like inspecting it because they thought it was amazing and cool. They hadn't seen one in a long time.
Yeah, so I've never had a smartphone. And I think for me, I know I would love it too much. So this way, I just have my little flip phone. But my family, all 8 of them, are big group texters, which I don't know if any of you have a flip phone, but it takes 2 minutes for every group text to load on my phone. And so my phone will be completely monopolized, but someone will be like, hey, what are you guys doing tonight? And then every member of my family will be like, nothing. And everyone, it will take 2 minutes. And I keep telling them not to, and they ignore me. So maybe now they'll know. Please don't add me to the group text anymore.
How is it to not be on social media? Have you ever been on social media?
I've never had Twitter or Instagram because the technology prevents me. I'm interested in technology preventing me from doing things. I'm not interested in more access, or I don't want people to be able to get a hold of me. The flip phone is a great excuse for anything. Just like lateness, you can just hold it up and people are like, oh my God. Okay. But yeah, I do end up calling my siblings a lot for directions places, being like, this is where I'm at, could you just look it up? And I think also it provides you a certain amount of mental space, which I feel like is helpful for writing. I feel like, especially the best sort of writing I've done, I felt like, is when you get to go deep, and sort of being in constant contact brings you up to the surface a little bit. And I like having more sustained sort of solo writing time.
Yeah. What's your writing process like? How often do you write? How long? How much do you cry?
So much. Yeah, I always think I should make up a writing process when I get asked that question, because I don't have one. And you always hear writers who are like, oh, I'm up with the sun. Like I run a quick 5 miles. Then I put on my writing cloak and write my, that's not how I've ever experienced it. But I understand now, writing the second book, that discipline is better, and I will have to get it pretty soon. I don't want it, but I don't know what the alternatives are.
Do you write every day? How long do you write? Is it totally random?
It's totally random, which again, it sounds so bad. I feel like I've never heard anyone answer it that way. They always have a good response.
You're like this literary ingenue. You can say whatever you want.
Okay. So yeah, no writing process, but I'm interested if anyone has an idea.
Do you use a computer?
I use a computer.
I'm actually not sure.
That's an easy question to answer. Yes. And going back to the trunk of writing accessories, I wish that there's some other way. Because I think it's very particular to writers too. It's like you're working on the same thing that you check your email on.
Yeah.
And sort of, play your music. It's an odd, fractious device. And I wish there was something with a little more integrity. But you don't want to be the writer with the typewriter. It's a little much, I think. You might as well have a writing cloak if you're going to go that direction.
It's definitely a little much. So, but I'm still trying to get a handle on this. Do you just write when it strikes you? Do you write in bursts? How long do you, what's the longest you'll write for? Or do you go in whole days?
Yeah, when I was working on this book, it was, especially towards the end, I was working almost every day for sometimes 12 hours, which was funny. I had to get these little splints for my fingers. So, again, you think that it will be this really dignified occasion finishing your book, but I was like, tap, tap, tap with my splinted fingers. So it didn't feel very cool. But I was writing a lot. And I think it's once you click into a certain kind of story or momentum, for me, that's when I think it's when the world of the book becomes more interesting than the world of the people you know.
And that was my experience as a reader when I was young. Like I would disappear into the books, you know, and take on the characters' emotions, and I would come out all moody for dinner because something was happening with one of my characters. Did you have that experience while you were writing?
I did, and there was this moment when I was writing the book. I lived in this very small 9x12 shed in my friend's backyard.
Tell us more about that, Emma.
It had no internet or bathroom. The bathroom was more important to me than the internet. So it was this very tiny space where you could really sort of hide away, and it felt like the only thing there was working on this book. So in those moments, it was totally consuming, and I think kind of a helpful space to write a book in, because you live it.
Yeah. I don't know. I have so many questions I want to ask you still. Weren't you an actor at one point, or trying to be one?
As a child, I was briefly a terrible child actor. I mean, are there any good ones? I don't know if there's ever been a good one. But my peak moment was playing a young Billie Jean King. I'm not athletic at all. In a TV movie of the week. I look like a Far Side character. I had cat's eye glasses and a beehive, basically. I was 11 years old. It wasn't a pretty look. But I was briefly a child actor, and I think in a lot of ways it was actually helpful, because I think it was after the same impulse as writing, which is, there's this artificial world, adjacent to the world we know.
That's what I was going to ask you. How did it inform your writing?
And just even to see the line where the set ended and the real world began, it just sort of gets you into that mode of thinking, I can make a separate reality, something that looks the way I want it to look, and it can be artificial, and sort of how do you make that, and what's it like? And also, I think it was interesting just to engage, because it's such a big part of the mythology of California too. It's movie making and this that part of it, which was kind of special too, but weird.
What is happening with the movie for the girls?
The movie rights have been bought. They asked if I wanted to write the script, and I said no. I think for me, it's I've spent a lot of time with the book already, and I didn't want to sort of work on it in some medium which I knew nothing about. So I'm sort of blessedly ignorant of everything about the movie.
And is there any kind of time frame or timeline, or do you have
I don't know.
feelings about it all?
I don't know. Yeah, no feelings, except my sisters have all requested to be extras. That's the only feeling I have about it.
Is there anything you see happening in the film that didn't happen in the book, or anything that you feel like they would do or not do?
I actually read the script, which was really weird. It's have you ever seen those books where it's adapted from a movie when they write a book, a novelization? It was like that, but sort of the other way, where you're it's so strange what they choose to keep in sort of your...
It has to be condensed so much.
Yeah, but it was kind of a cool experience. It's funny, as we were talking about earlier, it's you create this thing and then suddenly it's out in the world.
It doesn't belong to you anymore.
Yeah. So in a way that hastened the process of seeing someone else turn it into this other sort of art form already is kind of cool.
Cool. Is it in production? Is it happening?
I feel movie stuff is so murky. It's you're sort of throwing a fish into a sea lion pen. You're bye. See you, maybe.
So how does all this feel right now? I mean, you have this hugely successful debut novel. You're young. Everyone's talking about it. Does it feel like just normal life, or does it actually, I know it's hard,
It doesn't feel like normal life. That's the easy part of the question to answer. I guess the other stuff, it's really trying to minimize my information, which my sisters are really good for. They sort of are they sort of comb through the internet, and so I don't have to. And they tell me if there's anything I should be reading, but mostly I don't, which I think is a good space to be in. And then also just remembering that it almost doesn't have to do with me at this point. It's something else that runs parallel to the book, but doesn't really intersect with it. And that really my job is to write the next thing.
Yeah. I was curious what your thoughts are about being a really successful literary woman. I was out with some writer friends last night, and we were talking about you. And but one of my friends was just like, more power to the chick who gets the huge book deal, because it doesn't happen as often, that it happens for a woman. And I was just curious. I was at a conference like a month ago, and I was with a writer friend. We were both presenting and speaking at this conference. And there were all these white male writers that were there too, and with us, and we were all pals, and we were all parents. We all had small children, and that was kind of well known. And at some point, my friend and I we stood up to walk out of this thing, and this man turned around and he said, "Hey, ladies, who's watching your babies this weekend?" And I was like, "Oh my God." He would never ask these guys that.
Right.
Like, no one asks the male writers, like, who's watching your kids this weekend? And I was just like, they're with their dads.
Yeah.
But, there very much is, I don't think people often realize how different it is to be a female writer.
Yeah, it's much different.
Men don't read women's books, like men don't go to I mean, actually, this is so not true here, but it's we read all kinds of books. We support so many more male writers than they support us, and it comes out in the industry.
It's definitely a different experience, and it's been sort of strange, especially for a book about what feels like to be a girl or sort of girlhood. It's very strange then to be promoting it as a young woman writer. You're sort of like, have you read the book? Sometimes when people ask you questions, you're like, okay. And like I feel like a question I just heard recently, which reminds me of sort of who's watching your kids, is like, this book's pretty like, whoa, what do your parents think about the book? And you're like, do you ask male writers what their parents think about the book? Like, it's not a memoir, like it's not, I feel like that's a way that we sort of signify to women that a lot of their work is like emotional labor and sort of managing relationships. We see them in relation to people as a mother or like a sister or daughter, instead of as autonomous artists, and sort of couching a lot of stuff in that. And then also, just in the few like little things I've read, just like the focus on like, oh, her hair is this length. I'm like, is that a thing that you talk about male authors' hair? It's like, yay, hi, it's looking good. It's all there. It's like, it's a strange experience. And it's also hard because you're a bit out of your control at a certain point, and how much do you want to react against it, or how can you even almost, like someone who asked me about sort of what do your parents think about the book, I said what I said just now, and then he changed his question when they printed the interview, so he had never asked me about my parents' book, so it just sounded like all of a sudden I was giving a lecture about parents and books, and it's like, okay, it's just an odd experience. I emailed them. I was like, put that back in right now.
Nice. I mean, you were at The New Yorker for a while, too. You were a fiction reader?
Yeah.
And did you see any of that discrepancy there?
Not so much there. I mean, that was kind of a great place to work as someone who wanted to write fiction. It was both really intimidating because, every week, it seems there's a beautiful short story written by someone, and you just think they must vomit them out. But then you see, these stories would come in by these famous writers who I'd grown up reading and loving, and they'd come in, some older writers still fax their stories in. They only fax. So like the fax machine would be going, you're like, what gem is coming through the fax machine right now? But it would come through and everything would be misspelled. And it would be this beautiful story, but it would be in like Comic Sans font. And you're like, oh, it doesn't just come out in the New Yorker font. I feel like that was a major realization for me, is that these writers were actually working on them And I think that was helpful. You sort of see that there's a process, that it's not all sort of what you experience as a reader, which is this like seamless reading experience.
In 5 minutes, we're going to go to a Q&A with Emma, and we're going to ask that you guys line up in single file with that microphone over there, and that you ask single one-part questions that are actually questions. You ready for that?
Yeah.
So wait, what was I going to ask you next? What advice do you have for people who are writing their own books or want to be writers themselves? And you're the big success story. So like people, how do you get from, wanting to do it to where you're sitting, or what would you advise?
I feel like the best and sort of only advice I could ever imagine giving is just reading a lot and reading like a lunatic across like many genres and sort of writing about what interests you and not what you think you should write. But yeah, I don't feel qualified to give advice to anyone. I'd rather take your advice as a therapist.
No, mine would be the same, just to read as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to devote time to it, though. I think so much time needs to be really created to write. People are always saying, I have a book I want to write. And I'm like, well, you got to sit down and write it.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen to you. You don't just like accidentally write a book. You have to really make time for it. And it's hard. It's really hard. And I think writing can be really painful. It looks really fun when we're up here and we're talking, the book is done and you're like, you're holding it, but it's a really challenging process.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll always do it? Will there be anything else that you might want to do?
I mean, acting, I was such a great Billie Jean King. No, I don't know. That's really the thing. As painful as writing is, there's like nothing else that I can imagine doing, which I guess is a comfort in a way. You're kind of just like stuck with it. Yeah. Owning a junk shop, I feel like that would be my only other calling. I feel that they could dovetail nicely.
Okay. On that note, I think we're going to go to questions.
Hello. Something I was thinking about as you were talking is about how you've had, and it probably feels weird to be like, you've had this amazing success. And you're like, yeah, I know, everyone says it, but you have. And what I'm curious about is how, not your family, but your friends and peers, how the best ways that your peers have supported you. So someone who's a close friend, a really positive way that you've been supported through this success. I'm sure there's jealousy and weird feelings in your peer group. And then some ways that they're not quite the way you maybe would have wanted to be supported, or the intentions maybe were good or bad. But I'd love to hear about what the experience is like of your peers' reactions to this and sort of the spectrum that you've experienced in that.
Yeah, thank you. I sort of lucked out with my friends, and my closest friends are writers. We met at Columbia, so you'd think it would be sort of a fraught situation, but they've been nothing but supportive and so kind. And like if they've had sort of conflicted feelings, they've never sort of shown them to me, which I think must, take some effort. And I'm so grateful. It sort of is a situation, I don't know how I would react if the situation was reversed. Probably be a nightmare. But yeah, I don't know, they've been really wonderful. And I think, they're also the people who've read my writing from an early stage of this book. And so in a lot of ways, they just feel really proud and protective, which is the nicest kind of feeling. They're the ones who sort of are like angry about a bad Amazon review. Like, maybe you could be angry about it, and then I don't have to be, but I'm angry about it too. And then, I don't know. I mean, I have such a small friend group that I kind of don't have friends close to me who have been ambivalent or strange about the book, which has been nice. So yeah, I don't really have like an opposite example. People, it's surprising actually how supportive and kind people have been about the book. And you know, I think sort of, especially people who've grown up on the internet, you're sort of used to this really sort of mob mentality where the world is out to get you. And I've sort of seen little glimmers of that, but for the most part, people have been really responsive, and it really feels nice to put something out into the world that people could enjoy or find meaningful.
Hi, I have a fact collecting question. How did you go about doing research and then kind of choosing what to include or not to include? Because I mean, there's obviously historical combined with not historical, and was there information that you found that you thought was wonderful but maybe not appropriate for the book, and how did you sort of just disambiguate that from the rest of the research?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting moment in history, both like the 60s and then also Manson stuff and cult stuff, which, you know, there's so much memoir and movies. It's stuff you could just spend your entire life combing through. And it's such a pleasure. Like, it's what I love and would read even if I wasn't working on a book about it. But for me, it was like a lot about doing this research and then sort of leaving it behind as you were writing a new thing. And for me, it was really important that this not be a Manson book, and even that it not really be a 60s book. To me, that it's like a setting that I used fictionally because there were things about it that helped the story I wanted to tell about girls. But to me, it's really secondary. But yeah, there's so much fun research. My mom kept a diary also, which we've read, all my siblings, when she was maybe 13. Which again, you'd expect to read it and be like, oh, she's writing about man landing on the moon. But on that day, she's just like, I got a terrible haircut today. Like, no mention of any like great historical moment. And for me, that was really helpful in writing about a moment that isn't now, is that people don't experience moments through the lens of history. People are all living their lives. And sort of what you are most concerned about is your haircut and the people who you love and are sort of embroiled in these emotional experiences with. So for me, like the research was always secondary to that more like visceral, emotional experience.
Hi there. Question about not the writing process, but about the book cover, the illustration, and your influence or ability to change that or that process? Like, did you have a chance to pick through illustrators or the design cover, that sort of thing?
Yeah, the book cover designer is named Peter Mendelsohn, and I was a huge fan of his work long before I had ever written a book, and it was always my sort of secret dream that he design a cover for me. A lot of what I found out is that a lot of book cover designers don't even read the book, which seems so strange. But he reads like, and I saw his copy of the manuscript, and he had, you know, circled all these things. There were all these notes, sort of. He basically writes down any image he finds important or like it has a little spark. He was almost my best reader in a way. And he was my one bratty request to Random House. I was like, please let Peter Mendelsohn do the cover. So he did, and I love it. And there was one moment when Random House really wanted it to be a hot pink. And that was I guess I had two bratty requests. And my second one was, please do not make a hot pink. So it's not. Yeah, and he's kind of just a great cover designer. I'd love to work with him for any books I happen to write in the future.
Hi, Emma. What's stuck in my head from reading your book is what girls were willing to do to be seen. And I'm wondering if you think we've made any progress in that realm, and if girls, was that a moment in time, or is it still a danger today?
I think for me, like I was saying, like the 60s, it was a lot about mood and atmosphere, and a lot of the gender stuff maybe is specific to that era. but in a lot of ways, I think that primal desire to be seen and known and accepted, it will never go away. And in that way, that book could be set in the present day, I think. And I don't know that things have really gotten better for girls in sort of the way that they move through the world. I think the internet is sort of a funny thing because it really externalizes and makes literal this desire to be seen. Just sort of Instagram and all these ways when you're basically saying like, see me, like, do you see me now? What about now? Like, and I'm thankful that I didn't grow up when that was so pervasive, because it does, it seems overwhelming. But it does sort of offer this mirage of being seen and noticed. So maybe that's a difference, but I don't know.
Hi, Emma. Have you ever thought about writing a mystery novel?
Thank you for your question, sir.
Is that your dad?
This is my father.
Well,
This is a thing he used to tell me. My dad really only reads Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine and Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine. And he told me he would consider me a real writer when I publish a story in one of those. So it's one day. But yeah, maybe. Thank you for your question.
Hi, Emma. So you've spent a lot of time learning from great writers in terms of what you've read and in school and around your peers. So I was wondering what advice from them stands out.
I got to take a class at Columbia with Richard Ford, who was one of the writers I had grown up reading, and who really defined my sort of experience of the short story, what it looked like and what it meant. And he was so thoughtful and well-spoken. He can basically quote Henry James at any moment. And you're like, do you have cards somewhere? I mean, where's this? It made me think that maybe you should do that if you want to be a writer. Just like think of some good quotations that you always have at hand. But he was just really smart to me about thinking about character, and he basically would always tell us that there is no such thing as character, that people are capable of anything, and that character is this line that writers have to draw around this very messy experience of being human, and sort of how do you reflect what it actually feels like to be human, which is, I don't think we experience ourselves as like a good person or a bad person or like this kind of character. You kind of just encounter life as it comes. And so I was thinking a lot about that while I was writing this book, just having a character who didn't necessarily have to learn anything, or a book where there wasn't a tidy moral at the end. It didn't have a redemptive storyline. It sort of felt more true to lived life. And he was also very good about, you pick some descriptive detail, and he'd always be like, well, what's the detail next to that detail? What's the adjacent detail? And that helped me a lot with writing, I think. Sort of everyone gravitates towards the same descriptor, and there must be something that's related, but that's not the thing.
Great. I'm an inveterate fiction reader, and I usually go and I open up the book, and I say, I looked up because of the laughter and kept looking because of the girls. And on that basis, I'm going to read your book. Tell me how you guys come up with the first line of these books.
I don't know. I think for me, yeah, I mean, I'm a big reader too, so you read the first line and you think, where is this going? Is this person in command of a world? Like, what are they pointing to? Like, are they giving you respect as a reader? For me, that's important. Like, because I read so much, it's like there are certain writers who you can tell they're sort of doing their own thing and they've forgotten about you. But I like writers who think of the reading experience. And so, yeah, I think with that opening, for me, it was just a sense of how do you immediately drop someone into a time and place, and sort of this feeling, which I think is fairly universal, of seeing somebody a stranger and really immediately projecting this whole world onto them almost. But yeah. Thanks.
Hi, I'm from the Inform team, and I read your book in preparation for this event and absolutely loved it. But I just had one question. Was there anything that was in the book originally that was taken out by your publishers or editors?
What was taken out? There wasn't much. They actually wanted me to add some things. So what ended up really being changed is maybe I added 2 more scenes at the ranch, the sort of commune where the book is set, because they wanted a little more of daily life there. But there wasn't, they did, my editor said, she's a very formal, sort of traditional, old school editor. She's great. She wears Chanel suits. I've never seen it before. It's cool. And she writes me these formal editorial letters. And she wrote me one that was like, "Dear Emma, I think there are a few too many pimples in this book. A few too many scabs and pimples and rashes." Which I think I really was a reaction to as a teenager. I remember reading all of these books and no one ever had pimples. And I remember reading Little House on the Prairie, and I asked my sister, I was like, "Do you think they had pimples back then?" Because no one ever mentions it. So I really wanted to write a book where teenagers were as god-awful as they appear to us in real life. So I toned it down, but there are still a lot.
All right. Last question of the evening. As is Inforum tradition, what is your 60-second idea to change the world?
So listen, they told me about this question at the beginning of this thing as if that would help me come up with a good answer. And I haven't come up with one in this entire, hour since they told me about it. So I'm just gonna, keep not having an answer to that question. Do you have a good answer to that question?
You're not turning this around on me.
Yeah.
Not at the 11th hour.
Dad? Any thoughts?
He does.
Relax and have a glass of wine.
Great.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Emma. It was such a pleasure.